Well, hello. I'm going to talk to you about wood process, specifically forming processes. We've looked so far at wasting processes and cutting and removing material, getting the timber to size, but now we want to know about how can we actually shape it into a certain form. So let's look at lamination first. Lamination is pretty difficult, if I'm honest. It requires a lot of work and it's pretty slow and it can be incredibly messy. This video here can explain it much better than I can in terms of the visuals of it. But just so that you know, essentially the sorts of things that lamination can make is things like furniture, like really decorative furniture. You can get incredibly complex curves out of lamination, especially when you work with very, very thin, what we call veneer. Veneer is like a paper thin layer of wood. When you stack that up with glue in the middle, or as we probably use PVA glue, which is the polyvinyl acetate, that's just like regular wood glue, and you clamp it between two formers like this, you then get a locked shape once the glue has set. So it's basically the glue, once that's dried and hardened, it will like hold the timber in that new shape. So that's essentially what lamination is. Now the next one is steam bending. Steam bending is a lot less messy than laminating, but it achieves pretty much the same results. It probably takes about the same amount of time to do, but you can't do it with every type of timber. So with lamination, you can do it with a lot of types of timber. If you can get the veneer thin enough and you can get like flexible veneer, then you can basically laminate most timbers. But like steam bending, it only really works with certain types of timbers. Now, these are types of timbers that have quite a high level of sort of natural resin, natural glue within them. So I mean, pine is a good example. Pine has a lot of it's a very sappy timber, so it's got a lot of like natural glue within it. So what happens with steam bending is, you can see in here this nice little GIF or GIF, whatever you want to call it. You can put wood into what's called a steam box, and the steam box literally just pushes in hot, wet air, like literally steam. It's like having a kettle just constantly giving out steam, and that gets pumped into the steam box and really high temperature, and you leave the timber in there for a few hours, and what that does is it softens the timber. All the moisture gets into the timber and it makes all the fibers sort of relax, and all that natural glue and natural resin will soften. That actually makes the wood very, very plastic. After that, plastic meaning it's very bendable and formable. So once it's fully soaked and fully softened up, you can then wrap the timber around a former, and that's as shown here in this image of the guitar body. So it's basically how acoustic guitar bodies are often made, around certainly the side panels of them. So it's the same process as lamination, really. You need a former, and you need a way of clamping it around the former, and then you've just got to leave it there until it dries and cools. And what happens is that the natural sort of adhesive within the timber will, as it solidifies, as it cools, it will solidify, and then it will hold the timber into that shape. So it's actually great because there's almost no mess at all. There's like no PVA glue needed, so it's a lot less wasteful. If you were forming around the jig, because there's no mess, you don't have to then sort of clean up the jig before you do the next one. You'd have a jig set up, say for this chair leg here, you could have the jig set up already, and so you could steam like 10 pieces of wood all at the same time, and then you could form like all those pieces. If you had a number of jigs, you could form them all at the same time. So it's a good way of batch producing. Goodness, I'm mincing my words. It's a good way of batch producing timber into a range of shapes. So you can see this chair here actually only has two pieces to make up the back and the front of the chair. So you basically have two jigs, you clamp the timber into place. It'll take, I don't know, an hour or two to actually cool, but when you release it, it will then be kept in that position there, and then you can just sand it down. So it's a very, very versatile and very effective process.